pressing *6 and unmute by pressing *6 again. Avant de poser une question, veuillez vous identifier. Libre à vous de poser vos questions dans la langue officielle de votre choix. Pour mettre votre ligne en mode discrétion, appuyez sur *6. Pour l'enlever, faites *6 encore une fois. First question goes to Kim McCrail with the Wall Street Journal.
Hi, thanks very much for taking the question. I'd like to ask about the mention that you had in your speech today about the effective lower bound and the possibility of reassessing it. Is Governing Council actually actively considering lowering the estimate for the effective lower bound? And can you just describe in some more detail if there have been conversations around the question of what is the effective lower bound? What have those conversations been like?
Thank you, Kim, for the question. So I just want to put back into context. So again, here, what we're discussing is, if things, right now we really have positive and negative news, or kind of upside risk and downside risk. That's really the general message we were giving. And we wanted to give an idea that in both the different scenarios that we can do things. And in particular, in the aspect of if the downside risk was materializing kind of worse than we expect right now, and really kind of start creating scarring, we might need to increase stimulus. So we went through the different options we had, and this was just one option, as you mentioned, the aspect that we could increase doing more QE, we could start thinking about yield curve control, and we are potentially considering that as an option is to reevaluate that effective lower bound. Just to remember, putting things in context, that level of the bound was decided at the beginning of the crisis when financial markets were working very poorly. Now things are working much more, so we're trying just to reassess. Maybe it is still the right level to kind of keep markets functioning. The last thing we'd like to do is do something that would kind of disturb market functioning, but at the same time, we see the possibility that is something that can be reassessed, and we're on doing work on it, but nothing has been decided in any particular way between those options as we'd use them if we need to going forward.
Thanks. And can you just give a bit more information about when you started to reassess that, as you were describing, and whether you think you might have an update in the near future on that?
So this is something that we've been thinking through for quite a while, because at the beginning, this was a decision that was taken that seemed to be the right thing at that point in time, and as we're looking at different experiences across different countries, we kind of kept looking at that and keeping it in focus. So it's been something that's been in the back of our mind for a while. But it's not something that's at the forefront yet. It's just a possibility among the different tools that we have, and we try to make it clear that we have a set of tools, and that's just one thing that we're considering and thinking a bit about.
So next up, we have Dave Parkinson from the Globe and Mail. I'll just remind people on the line to mute their line. So next up, we have David.
Hi, Paul. Dave Parkinson.
Go ahead, Dave.
Sorry, go ahead, Alex. Okay, thanks, Paul. Wanted to ask a little bit about there were a couple of things that came up in the press release yesterday that caught the eye of some people in the market, and one of them was, and you repeated it again in your speech today, and actually gave a little bit more detail, and that was talking about the outlook and looking at the closing of the output gap, and therefore, the timing of any rate changes being out into 2023. And both the statement yesterday and again in your speech today, you said that as of the October MPR, that doesn't look like it's until 2023. And you elaborated by saying that a full analysis hasn't yet been done on that as to whether it's going to be shifted. Can you elaborate on do we now think, are we sort of referring back to the October numbers as acknowledging that the situation has changed, but you just haven't done the assessment yet? Or, might we be looking at a reassessment of the timing of that as soon as the next MPR? What's sort of the status of your analysis of what's changed since October?
Yes, a very good question, Dave. And so we're really having both sides. So though this isn't a case where we're just saying we stayed pat, but it's not a case because everything is just developing exactly as we predicted. It's more, we have a lot of new things happening. On one side, the resurgence of COVID-19 cases across Canada is really important, and that's really kind of pressing on that downside risk. And we have to evaluate whether that's going to create extra scarring. So on that side, there might be things like, small businesses, for example, that have been pulling the way through all the way to now might start having, extra difficulties. We might see more problems on that side. That would be the type of scarring that would push us to kind of think, well, things are going to be even harder to kind of bring back afterwards. On the flip side, the vaccine is clearly a more positive news relative to October NPR, and that is actually kind of looking good in that sense. But again, there's a lot of uncertainty in the speed that will be brought out and how effective it'll be. So we have both the good news and this bad news, and we have to really work hard to try to put all those elements together to try to figure out when you have good and bad, where does it end up? Does it change your assessment? And right now, we really don't have done all that work to be able to do that. If you know as well as I do, the full projection is really on our NPR cycle. So in January, we should have a new full projection, and that is when I'd be able to kind of give you a kind of more update on that of how we think about things. So we're really working hard, trying to really integrate all that new information that we have and try to figure out what it means for our kind of further out in our outlook.
Okay, thanks. And I also wanted to ask about another thing that seemed to have caught the street's eye, and that was the reference of applying QE, quote, across the yield curve, unquote, which they again noted was kind of a new wording in the press release. And some have speculated whether that is inching towards something that might not be quite yield curve control, but is becoming more YYCer than we have been until now. Can you tell me what the meaning and significance is of adding those words to the press release and what they signify in terms of the approach of applying the QE program?
Yes, this really reflects our recalibration from last time, where we were saying, we were buying a lot more at the low end, and now we're spreading that out and kind of going all across the yield curve and buying at all these different rates, with the idea that all those different rates across the yield curve as they go to 5, 10 years and further out are things that affect different groups and different decisions, and we'd like to help all those different decisions across. So yes, we've moved there, and it really is a reflection of restatement, in other words, of why we were doing the recalibration, why we were changing from pattern where we were buying quite a few short terms and partly longer terms, but really moving more across that yield curve. So that's the main information there. It really is a reflection of that previous policy change.
Okay, great. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you. For reporters who are late joining the call, if you have a question, let us know by sending an email to communications@bankofcanada.ca and we'll put you in the queue. Pour les journalistes qui se sont joints à l'appel avec un peu de retard, envoyez un bref courriel à communication@banqueducanada.ca si vous souhaitez poser une question et on ajoutera votre nom à la liste. So next up, we'll have Tony Mace from Mace News, followed by Shelley Hagan with Bloomberg, and Julie Gordon with Reuters. Tony, go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Deputy Governor. How concerned are you about the impact of the strong Canadian dollar on the outlook for achieving the bank's inflation target?
So, as you know, we don't target a particular exchange rate, but obviously we're an open economy, and so the exchange rate is very important for our outlook. And so as, the exchange rate moves, that affects how, first of all, we have to have an idea of what's moving it. It's a very different thing, what type of force is moving it, how it affects our economy. But by the end, our decisions are always about the outlook. So the exchange rate is one element that is taken into account in our calculations of our outlook. And certainly that's one input. And in this case, we've had not only us, there's been a general appreciation of a lot of currencies versus the U.S. currency. And we've been in that movement. We're keeping an eye on that. and we'll have to evaluate again by January when we'll have a whole new projection, figuring out to what extent that affects our outlook. So it's one element among many.
Do you have a follow-up, Tony?
Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me now? I'm sorry, I was muted.
We can hear you.
Are you there? Okay, sorry about that. I got bumped off the call. It's possible you addressed this earlier, but in terms of the effect of the good news on the vaccines and the other positive news about foreign demand for Canadian goods, I mean, how do you assess the upside risk to the bank's forecast, and how would that affect the likely timing of policy liftoff? Thank you.
I briefly addressed it in the previous one, but I'll kind of address it again there, Tony. So again, as we're looking for the outlook, we really have these two sides of news. It really is these extra downside risks due to the kind of increased cases of COVID right now across the country and some of the new measures that are put in. And on the flip side, we have the good news coming from slightly greater external demand, and certainly the vaccine is the big one. And we have to figure out how these balance themselves out. We're really working very hard on that right now. We haven't had time to assess the relative components of how all that fits together, and we should have an answer about that more in January.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Tony. Next, we'll go to Shelley Hagan with Bloomberg.
Hello. In your speech, you discussed that there are both downside and upside risks to inflation. Do you believe that these risks are equally balanced?
This kind of follows up a little bit that I've just said, in the sense that we're trying to do that calculation. So if kind of as of right now, I don't have a full answer to that. We're trying to bring in, this is all, a lot of information has been coming out very recently. To work that through to figure out how they balance each other off is what we're doing. So right now we haven't changed our assessment of whether that balances off on one side more than the other. And that's why we had a quite kind of stand pat type of decision yesterday. We're kind of keeping there, and we're really keeping our options open on both sides. And in that sense, it's more or less balanced at this point, but that's really based on more a lack of having been able to really do all the work behind there to give a well-informed answer.
And if things do deteriorate for the worse on the economic outlook, you said one of the options would be to increase the stimulus of the QE program. Can you explain what that would entail?
So that could entail different things. Again, like in our recalibration, that could mean we'd kind of even go faster in this move between the short and longer end. So we could try to move our purchases quicker in that direction. That would be one possibility. The aspect we could decide to increase the quantity. I don't think that's the direction we'd want to go at this point, but it's probably more this aspect of moving things around and moving faster and kind of further out the yield curve as we buy more bonds in that part of the yield curve.
Thank you.
Next, we'll go to Julie Gordon with Reuters.
Oh, hi there. Thanks for taking our questions, Deputy Governor. So if I could just take you back to those potential stimuluses, what would be the point of cutting rates further to support the economy in the near term if monetary policy works with a lag?
Well, again, here we're talking about the effect right now. We don't think the economy gets back to the output gap closed and having inflation back to sustainable level of 2% inflation before almost 2 years from now. And so even if it's working with a lag, we have quite a ways of going. So if we need more stimulus now, if we think things, especially if we think there's more scarring due to this new second wave of COVID, there's no problem of thinking that we might actually put more stimulus in if necessary, if really things are getting worse than they are now.
Okay, thanks. And And then in terms of yield curve controls, have you discussed levels to target? For instance, I think the 5-year rate is currently at about 0.5%. Would you keep it in mind to target at about that level or something different?
So we haven't gone into the details right now. We want to make sure, if we need it, we'll kind of get in and try to figure out what we need at that point. Right now, we haven't taken any particular stand on, this would be the way we'd implement it. There's a lot of different ways also of implementing yield curve control, how you kind of, frame it, how you kind of give an idea of both also, the exit strategies, different things. So we haven't gotten to that level of detail because these are still very much options. First of all, we have to see that the system would need more stimulus. And then once we decide if it needs more stimulus, then we start looking in this set of tools we have, which one we think is kind of more effective and more useful at that point in time.
Thank you.
So next we'll go to Greg Quinn with Market News, followed by David Koch with Times and Transcript. Go ahead, Greg.
Good afternoon. You may have seen that the finance minister was asked some questions about the Bank of Canada at a hearing this week. I'd like to give you a chance to respond to one aspect of it. The idea was raised that the Bank of Canada could lose a lot of money on its QE trades in the market as yields rose. In other words, you would lose money on bond purchases, and this could hurt the taxpayer or the public interest. I wondered if you could help me game out what would happen if the Bank of Canada ran QE with the mind of avoiding losses in the market, its dealings with investors. What would happen in the market, and is there any significant precedent in central banking history to operate quantitative easing that way?
So I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, and maybe if you could repeat that a bit. So because there's one part, let me just take a step back and kind of first answer the first part. It is true that these operations, quantitative easing, has a certain risk. We do put in interest rate risk on our balance sheet, and so there is implicitly a possibility that we could lose, but also gain money by this. Actually, a lot of central banks actually made quite a bit of money in the past with quantitative easing. So it's two ways here. But we do think that type of risk is relatively small relative to the benefits for the Canadian economy of actually stimulating it and kind of getting more employment and getting us closer to the 2% target. That's really our goal, and that's really the important part. I'm not sure, are you asking a question about how we do something different if we didn't want to have any risk, or I'm not quite sure.
Is there, could you run quantitative easing effectively by setting up trades or purchases in the market so they would not lose money on paper or in practice? And has anyone else ever tried anything like that in central banking lore?
So my impression is what you're asking is that I don't think it's possible. It is partly the way you are affecting things is by going in the market and taking a bit of that risk. That's actually the action that's coming through here by reducing the term premiums on interest rates. And so there is a risk-taking attitude there. I think it's small. Again, I want to emphasize, I think that's small. Right now, we make money through this because we're actually buying bonds and getting paid more than we have to pay out on our settlement balances. So there'd have to be a lot of change before that kind of caused problems. But that's essentially at the heart of QE. So I don't think there's any way of kind of perfectly getting around that.
Thank you.
So we have time for one more question. So we'll finish up with David Koch from Times and Transcript. Go ahead, David.
Hi, Deputy Governor. Thanks for fielding some questions today. Speaking to the economist Jim Stanford, he says using QE to get the economy back to full capacity is wishful thinking, and the Bank of Canada will have to support government borrowing for fiscal policy, or, quote, the recovery will fall right off the rails, end quote. Any response to that?
So again, here what we're doing is we're trying to give the type of stimulus that we think is necessary. We're trying to keep those interest rates low and doing a job there. But it's clear that when you have hit an effective lower bound, you have less room to do certain things. We do still have quite a bit of tools, and that's the whole idea of QE, that even if when we can't change our interest rate at the effective lower bound, we can kind of move out the curve and try to affect rates that way. So we do think there's still these different parts and kind of stimulus. But at the same time, this is, monetary policy is not the only element in this whole picture. We're trying to do as much as we can to bring the economy back to its full capacity and get our inflation target back to 2%.
Okay, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the COVID-19 crisis is the first time the Bank of Canada has implemented QE, which was used elsewhere, notably the United States, in response to the subprime mortgage crisis. And what, in your view, can we learn from those experiences with QE?
Well, you're exactly right. This is the first time in Canada we're using QE, and lots of other countries have used it, particularly the US, the UK, Europe, Japan. So we have lots of experience out there of seeing how QE works. And in general, it is one of these tools that helps stimulate the economy, exactly running by reducing these longer term rates and kind of getting things going. At the same time, the QE programs have worked in the other countries of not kind of causing all sorts of bad problems at the same time, of having too much inflation coming out or other problems. And there was questions before in terms of revenue or things. It doesn't cause big problems for central banks. So it seems like a tool that is very reasonable to use, and that's why we're using it.
Thank you.
That concludes today's press conference. Thanks to Deputy Governor Beaudry and to everyone for joining us.